I had just come out of a 3-year relationship that hollowed me out in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. My ex hadn't been cruel, but just distant, emotionally unavailable, slowly teaching me to expect nothing. By the end, I felt numb and cynical, convinced that real intimacy was something people exaggerated. Still, I told myself the digital world might be different and safer. I downloaded a few dating apps and began scrolling through faces late at night, treating it like window shopping for a life I didn't yet have. That's when I matched with Mark. He stood out immediately, so I texted him. He was confident without being flashy, thoughtful in his messages, articulate in a way that felt intentional. He asked questions, he listened, he remembered small details. What started as casual chatting quickly became something more intense. We talked every day. Phone calls stretched until 4 in the morning, our voices low and intimate in the dark. His messages were warm, reassuring. Most of his words are, "I can't wait to hold you. I feel like I've known you forever." For the first time in years, I felt wanted without pressure. It felt safe in a way real relationships never had. When he invited me to spend a week at his house upstate, I didn't hesitate. I told myself it was spontaneous, romantic, a sign I was finally living again. I packed a suitcase with more excitement than caution. His house was stunning, modern, minimalist, tucked deep into a wooded valley far from neighboring homes. No close roads, no noise, just trees and quiet. The first day unfolded like a fantasy. We cooked dinner together, shared wine on the back deck, laughed easily. That night, lying beside him, I remember thinking this was the calm I'd been missing. But the feeling didn't last. The second morning, Mark told me he needed to drive into town for groceries. He kissed my forehead and said he'd be back within the hour. Alone in the house, I felt that familiar urge to be useful, to prove I belonged there. I decided to tidy the bedroom. I made the bed, straightened the shelves, and grabbed a broom to sweep the underneath of the bed. The broom struck something solid with a dull thud. I crouched down and pulled out a long leather sheath. Inside was a machete, far larger than anything practical. The blade was nicked and stained with dark, crusted residue that could only be dried blood. My chest tightened. Beside it lay a small leather-bound ledger. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were names, dates, heights, hair colors, notes. Tucked beside each entry was a Polaroid photograph of a woman, some smiling, some asleep, some unaware they were being photographed at all. A horrifying realization settled in. These were women who had stayed here before me. None of them had ever posted a review.
As I was still baffled, I heard gravel crunching outside. Mark was back. I quickly shoved everything back under the bed exactly where I'd found it, my breathing shallow and uncontrolled. By the time he entered the kitchen, I was seated at the table, gripping a glass of water so tightly my fingers ached. "You look pale, Sarah," he said, his tone noticeably lower. He stood behind me and placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip lingered, was firm and possessive. "I don't feel well," I said. "Dizzy. I think I need to go home and see my doctor." His expression hardened. "I'll call someone to come here," he said. "You shouldn't drive." "No," I blurted too quickly. I forced myself to slow down. "I have medication at home. My doctor said missing a dose could cause a seizure. I really have to go." He stared at me, silent, calculating. "I'll drive you," he said finally. "I already called my brother," I lied. "He lives nearby." Something dark flashed across Mark's face. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "I don't like surprises." I grabbed my bag and walked toward the door, my legs heavy and unsteady. On the porch, he pulled me into a tight hug that felt more like a warning than affection. "We'll see each other again," he whispered, "very soon." I smiled, got into my car, and drove until the gas light came on. I never looked back. I blocked him everywhere, deleted everything. But even now, whenever a dating app lights up with a new match notification, I feel that machete all over again, cold, heavy, and far too close.
My friends Tyler, Ben, and I had been planning the camping trip for months. It was meant to be a simple escape. 2 nights off-grid, hiking during the day, beers by the fire at night. We booked a site called North Ridge, a well-known campground praised for its scenic trails and isolation. None of us expected the isolation to turn into something else entirely. The drive into the mountains took longer than expected. As the road climbed higher, cell service faded to nothing, and the GPS began lagging, freezing, then rerouting us in slow, uncertain loops. By the time the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the road, we realized we'd missed a critical turn. North Ridge was nowhere in sight. We ended up at a wide clearing that didn't appear on the map. The ground was uneven, the trees too tightly packed, and the air felt strangely still, like the forest was holding its breath. No signposts, no markers, just an unofficial-looking campsite with old fire rings and trampled dirt. "It's too late to turn back," Ben said, staring into the darkening tree line. "We'll set up here and find the real site in the morning." None of us liked it, but exhaustion won over us. We pitched our tents as night fell. The woods were unnaturally quiet. No insects, no distant animals. When we finally lay down, sleep wouldn't come. The silence pressed in, broken only by the wind brushing the treetops. That's when Tyler noticed the building, about 100 yards from the clearing. Partially hidden behind thick, overgrown pines, stood a structure that didn't belong there. It was modern, glass walls, sharp angles, steel framing, more like a museum than anything meant for the wilderness. A single light glowed faintly inside. Bolted to the front door was a large metal sign. "Do not enter unless permission is granted." Being 21, curious, and stupidly confident, we laughed it off. We convinced ourselves it had to be a private art installation, maybe owned by some eccentric collector who liked isolation. The idea of something being forbidden only pulled us closer. We found a side door. It was unlocked and we went inside. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately. The air smelled metallic, like rust and old pennies. The interior was filled with sculptures that made my stomach tighten. Twisted arrangements of bone fused with corroded metal, shapes that hinted at human forms without ever fully becoming them. No labels, no security cameras, just silence. We wandered longer than we should have. Time blurred, and when Ben finally checked his watch, it was nearly 3 a.m. "We need to go," Tyler whispered. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast, empty space. We rushed back toward the main entrance, but the door wouldn't open. I grabbed the handle and felt my chest drop. A thick, industrial padlock has been hung from the inside, freshly secured. We stared at it, the reality settling in piece by piece. None of us had touched it. There were 3 of us. That meant someone else was inside. Someone who hung this new padlock. Suddenly, a sound echoed behind us in a slow, metallic dragging that scraped along the floor. A shadow stretched across the pristine white wall. We turned to see a man standing at the top of a glass staircase. He wore a torn tuxedo, stained dark at the cuffs. His face was smeared with fresh, wet blood, like a mask he hadn't bothered to clean. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't rushing. He was smiling. "You didn't ask," he whispered. Then he ran. His movements were wrong. As in, too fast, too uneven. We bolted through the museum, our footsteps crashing through the silence. Every turn felt calculated on his part. He knew the layout, anticipated our panic. His breathing stayed close, always just behind us. We burst into a back storage area filled with crates and hanging plastic sheets. "There!" Ben shouted, pointing to a narrow ventilation shaft left open for repairs. We crawled inside, metal biting into our arms and legs. I was last, within the last minute for me to escape. A cold and slick finger wrapped around my ankle. I kicked wildly, and I felt my boot connect with something soft, heard a wet thud. The grip loosened. I pulled myself free. We fell out to the other side into dirt and leaves and ran. We didn't stop until we reached the clearing. We abandoned the tents, threw our gear into the truck, and drove until the sky began to pale with dawn. We never reported it. No one would believe us. A glass museum in the woods. A man in a bloody tuxedo. A locked door from the inside. But the scars on our arms and legs are real. The scars are thin, silver reminders from the ventilation shaft. And every time I see a warning sign now, I don't question it. I listen. At 33, I believed I had won. Not just success, but control. I was the director of logistics for a multi-million-dollar firm in California, managing international supply chains that never slept. I own multiple properties, drove cars I'd once only seen in magazines, and moved through rooms with confidence people mistook for arrogance. I had earned every inch of my life. I was also married. Julian and I had been together for 8 years, married for 6. He was wealthy in his own right, but his success was quieter, slower, always trailing behind mine. At first, his admiration had felt supportive. He praised my ambition, bragged about me at dinners, told people I was brilliant. I didn't notice when admiration curdled into resentment. I didn't hear it in the pauses, or see it in the way his compliments began to sound rehearsed. By the time I sensed the greed beneath it all, it had already taken root. Our 6th wedding anniversary was approaching when Julian began acting unusually attentive. He insisted on handling every detail himself. Reservations, meals, surprises. "You work too hard, Catherine," he told me one evening, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Let me take care of you for once." He booked me a full day at an exclusive spa the day before our anniversary. No phones, no interruptions. I agreed, touched by what I thought was thoughtfulness, unaware that I was being gently guided out of my own life. The next morning, I was 10 minutes into a massage when a sharp realization cut through the calm. I remembered I'd left my second phone in Julian's car, the encrypted one. The phone is the main device tied to every contracts and proprietary data of my businesses. I can say the second phone I forgot inside. Julian's car is the most important phone to my business, and I couldn't risk it by not holding it with me, because messages can pop at any time concerning my business. I dressed quickly, ignored the confused looks from staff, and took an Uber home. Julian's car was still in the driveway. I used my spare key to open the passenger door, reaching for the phone on the seat. That's when I saw the paper on the dashboard. The paper consists of a funeral program mock-up. I picked it up slowly, my pulse roaring in my ears. The content on the paper shows in loving memory of Catherine Carlton, 1993 to 2026. Tomorrow's date, our anniversary. Cause of death, acute food poisoning. Even the service time was printed. I stood there in the heat, sunlight pressing against my skin, fully aware that I was holding my own death announcement. Julian hadn't planned a celebration. He'd planned an inheritance. He planned to kill me and took over my businesses and millions of money. So I decided to find out by myself. I entered the house through the mudroom, moving quietly. Julian was in the living room with his friend Marcus, laughing casually. From their words, I can heard phrases drift toward me. Phrases like distribution of assets, ironclad paperwork, toxicology will look natural. And this makes me believe that my husband is trying to kill me truly. So I tiptoed into the kitchen. I saw the cooler on the counter. Inside was a single serving of lobster bisque, my favorite, and a handwritten note was taped to the lid. To my beautiful wife only. Happy anniversary. On the stove sat a large pot of the same soup, clearly meant for Julian and Marcus. Safe, ordinary. My fear drained, replaced by clarity. I switched them. The poison portion went into the main pot. I poured myself a safe serving, sealed it, and labeled it exactly as he had. My hands shook, but my thoughts were precise. The next evening, Julian was radiant. He poured champagne, toasted loudly, spoke of our future. When dinner was served, he presented my bowl with theatrical care. "To your health, Catherine," he said. He ate from the pot I poured the poisoning food into. I watched him as he finished eating. 10 minutes later, he stopped in mid-sentence. He coughed out so much blood. His eyes met mine. That is when he knows I knew about his plans, and I have found a way to counter it. But due to his late noticing, he died on the dining room floor before the ambulance could even be dispatched. Fear gripped me also at that moment, because I didn't expect the poison he wanted to use on me was this fast to kill. Police make the investigation thoroughly. The poison, the program, the receipts, everything traced back to Julian. There was no proof I'd touched the food. In the eyes of the law, he had fallen victim to his own plan. And Marcus, who was his friend, is later arrested for plotting murder. I am free now. I run my companies without distraction, and I never eat a meal I didn't cook myself.